Hello everyone, today we are going to discuss about defense mechanism. Imagine you are late to office and hence entering the meeting hall late. When everyone starts looking at you, how will you respond or how will you feel? What will be your first few words? No, I'm sorry. The bus which I was traveling got stuck up in a traffic jam, or I was not aware that the meeting was scheduled for the morning session, and so on and so forth. Whatever one utters at that moment of time is more of spontaneous response with an intent to protect oneself or self-worth or self-image. In the process, wants to stay on the high. This is an autonomous, internal, soul-satisfying process. It can also be called an adjustment mechanism, which will help the individual to overcome anxiety in a short run. We humans adopt it many times to protect ourselves from embarrassment or pain. A temporary shock absorber, we can say, definitely not a physical one but a psychological one, to approach the situations which has risen all of a sudden. The strategies one uses for the management of anxiety are cognitive in nature, involving systematic changes in a way we think about problem situation. So how can we define it? Defense mechanism or psychological strategies operated predominantly at the unconscious level, which protects a person from anxiety arising from unacceptable thoughts or feelings and consequent actions. According to Freud, much of human behavior reflects an attempt to deal with or escape from anxiety. Thus, how the ego, the reality principle, deals with anxiety determines how people behave. Now, an important aspect being it functions at the unconscious level, where censorship or judgment by others are non-existent. Therefore, helps the individual to comfortably ward off unpleasant feelings risen out of a particular situation, or for that matter, even make a good thing feel better. This helps the individual in the process of guarding ego, or one may call it self-satisfaction, is maximized. For example, if a teacher asks a student, "Why have you not done your homework?" a normal reply would be inability or forgetfulness. But the child's quick response is based on fear and to avoid scolding or punishment. Hence, the reply mostly would be, "I was not well," or "completed the task but kept at home." In the process, negate or distract the teacher. This acts as a face saver before the class for a possible embarrassment. Now, the question arises, is it really worth it? In other words, one might ask, why do we need ego defenses? According to psychoanalytic theory, we use defense mechanism to protect ourselves from feelings of guilt which arises because we feel threatened or because our ID or superego becomes too demanding. Furthermore, we apply this in situations ideally protecting one's feeling of self, which also reflects in a way Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest. It is a good management or adjustment mechanism which has to be handled effectively and not to be overused to become a distinct personality trait. So ego defenses mechanisms are natural and normal for a human behavior, but when they get out of proportionate, that is very often used, neurosis develops, that is anxiety states, phobias, obsessions or hysteria, resulting in distortion of reality. So let me explain the origin of defense mechanism. Sigmund Freud, who was one of the pioneers, noted a number of ego defenses which was based on pleasure and pain principle. Later on, his daughter Anna Freud spent more of her time on research on 5 main mechanisms, defense mechanisms: repression, regression, projection, reaction formation and sublimation. So she says, humans will do anything to seek pleasure and avoid pain, as similar to what his father Sigmund Freud has said. Freud believed all defense mechanisms are responses to anxieties and how the consequent consciousness and unconsciousness manages the stress of a social situation. Many a times we may not be aware about the pain and discomfort, but as the ego takes it over at the unconscious level, a clash between the idea and the superego begins and compromises is attained, resulting in ego satisfaction. This is done to avoid negative reaction and feelings of insecurity. Another aspect being highlighted is that one may not be aware that he or she is using it, even though it may be obvious for people who are around them or around you. That is, when we start using excuses, if it becomes frequent, then it gets reflected in our trait and easy for others to label us. Let us look into some of the common defense mechanisms. I have chosen 5. We'll look at these things one by one. Freud has described many different kinds of defense mechanisms, the most common one being repression. This unconscious mechanism employed by the ego to keep disturbing or threatening thoughts from becoming conscious. It is a psychological attempt towards unwanted thoughts or impulses, painful memories or irrational beliefs, or even anxiety-provoking behaviors that can upset you. Instead of facing them, one may unconsciously choose to hide them in hopes of forgetting about them entirely. Thoughts that are often repressed are those that would result in feelings of guilt from the superego. A common predominant belief being, when people repress feelings or desires, they become totally unaware of that wish or desire. But there is no guarantee of a total disappearance from memory, and hence it might influence behaviors and can impact future relationships. A best example being relationship failure and disappointments at the younger age, and when the individual tries to repress those feelings at the unconscious level due to guilt, finds it difficult to establish new relationship as he or she grows. A child who is abused by a parent later on has no recollection of the event but has trouble forming relationships. One may not realize the impact this defense mechanism is having as repressed memories. It may appear through subconscious means and in altered forms such as dreams or slip of the tongue, Freudian slips. So one has to be quite careful about this, using it. The next one is denial. This is a very common defense mechanism we can see students often use in classroom. When you question a child, why are you looking at the other person's paper during test or exam, an immediate spontaneous reply at the unconscious level comes from the unconscious level is that, I didn't, sir, and if you want, you can check my paper also. No, this is quite common in schools and universities and colleges. It is protecting oneself from an unpleasant reality by refusing to accept it. Denial is a defense mechanism proposed by Anna Freud, which involves blocking of an external event from awareness. If the situation is too much to handle, the person just refuses to experience it. Thus, in some coronavirus cases, patients or people under quarantine try to deny their or his or her illness or quarantine state and try to flee. This happened even in my neighborhood, where a person was put under quarantine and a sticker was pasted in front of his home. So everybody started looking at the house suspiciously. The next day, the person removed the sticker. This happens. Denial. A person who has failed in recruitment exam will deny even attending the exam in the first place later on. If a teacher asks who has not prepared for exam to raise their hands, students may refuse to recognize their obvious lack of preparedness, fearing or perceiving a social embarrassment. So these are some of the examples of denial, which will help you to understand the concept. The third one, which is quite common, is also called as projection. Individuals tries to project their feelings and failures on others. Some thoughts or feelings you have about another person may make you uncomfortable. If you project those feelings, you are misattributing them to the other person. People attribute their own traits, unwanted thoughts, feelings and motives onto another person. That we call it as projection. For example, when parents question the child about his or her poor academic performance, the child attributes failure to online teaching mode adopted in school after coronavirus impact. This type of adjustment response, wherein the child tries to project the blame on other things and in the process satisfy self and feel comfortable, is called projection in defense mechanism. But if it is a consistent behavior, will lead to maladaptive behavior. The next one being displacement. It is the redirection of an impulse, usually aggressive, onto a powerless substitute target. The target can be a person or an object that can even serve as a symbolic substitute. Humans have the natural tendency to value oneself highly, and if self-esteem, self-worth are challenged, and if individual finds it difficult to accept it or cope up with, creates lot of psychological tension. A good example of this is getting angry at your child or spouse because of a bad day at work. Though spouse or child were not connected to the issue, they became easy targets of one's strong emotion, that is the husband or the father, since they are less problematic and cannot respond when compared to the boss at his workplace. So displacement occurs when the ID wants to do something of which the superego does not permit. The ego thus finds some other way of realizing what Freud mentions as the psychic energy of the ID. In the above stated example, this energy is transferred as aggression and displaced on a weak or irrelevant character or object. Another example which will help you to understand this better is, might be a person hitting the wall after the football team in which he bets his money on failed to qualify for the quarterfinals. So the last one which I am going to discuss is rationalization. Some people may cognitively attempt to explain logical undesirable behaviors with their own set of facts and opinions. This allows them to feel comfortable with the choice one made, even if he knows it's not right. Rationalization or rationalizing an event may help individual maintain self-respect or avoid guilt over something that he has gone wrong beyond his or her expectation. In Freud's classical psychoanalytic theory, it is an unconscious attempt or a conscious attempt to avoid addressing underlying reasons for behavior. For example, student who is caught copying in class test might try to justify it with their parents or friends by saying, "Who has not copied?" as if they have caught me. No? Another one, a person who didn't prepare well for a recruitment exam, on hearing about his friend's solid preparation, will state, even if one does well, one needs to give bribe to be selected. So why should I prepare? No? In many cases, rationalization is not harmful, but continuous self-deception. When a person consistently makes excuses for destructive behavior, it can become dangerous. So one should be quite aware of these things. Now let me conclude summarizing with the following points. The purpose of defense mechanism is to reduce anxiety as it acts as a temporary shock absorber psychologically. Its defense mechanism strategies are used for obtaining compromise solutions by satisfying egos. The pattern depends on one's ability. The same individual may use varied defense mechanisms as per his or her needs. Defense mechanisms may be used consciously but usually act at the unconscious and subconscious levels. Defense mechanisms are healthy only when use them infrequently, is able to form new acceptable behaviors like breaking stereotypes, is able to change the external environment positively, is able to modify his needs, uses mechanisms like rationalization or compensations, etc. It becomes unhealthy when one does not develop ability to change or modify one's abnormal behavior, retreats from the problems or reality, repeatedly uses the specific mechanisms that may interfere with maintenance of self-image, for example undoing, or one repeatedly offers excuses but keeps making the same mistake. Use mechanisms like regression, repression, denial and projections will also sometimes badly affect one's own self. So, hope it was useful and informative. Thank you for watching.